to 10 to 2. Just of time, so I'll just keep going. Moving on to land at Connington Road and Lewisham Road, the Tesco site. As I said at the start, I think there are some questions I'm happy response to response. But there are some questions that I would like to drill down. In relation to this site, can the council just set out how to derive the sort of mix of uses and also the site capacity?
Yes, so when we approached this site, albeit we have had a few pre-app with the landowner, but at that stage, and now we're not at a kind of advanced pre-app stage. So in line with our methodology as set out previously, we looked at a mathematical approach to looking at the indicative capacities. We recognise that this is an opportunity area. We recognise that it's a central site using the London SHLA methodology and PTEL 6. So ordinarily that would generate a density of 450 dwellings per hectare. However, we looked at the sensitivity of the site, and given that it, in our view, is an edge of town centre site, and given that there are some heritage assets within the site and immediately adjacent to the site, we felt that that needed to be reduced. So the density that we ended up on is the 355 dwellings per hectare as per the London SHLA table. We then looked at non-residential units, being mindful that there is a successful Tesco's on the site. We looked at the square meterage and then looked at the percentage split. So in terms of non-residential, we looked at 20% main town centre uses and then 5% employment. So overall, at the regulation 19 stage, we were looking at 407 net residential units, approximately 1,900 square metres of employment floor space, and then 7,600 square metres of main town centres floor space, primarily to re-provide the supermarket on the site. We have, as part of the 20% buffer work, we have re-looked at sites, particularly where landowners are suggesting that sites can be increased in terms of their density, and that's in the residential technical paper that was supplied through the examination that Angela can provide more detail on. And we looked at increasing the density for that site by looking at the average density within that area, and that was approximately 400 dwellings per hectare, which then uplifts that indicative net residential unit to 453 units. I mean, obviously, we can come on to the 5-year land supply. You will have seen that through the additional information that Angela has provided. We have effectively two versions of the trajectory, one which is the council's original assumptions, and one which looks at I'm trying to remember the terminology, but slower delivery assumptions. The first trajectory had this within the 5-year land supply. The second trajectory removes it from that 5-year land supply and suggests that it will be delivered years 6, 7, and 8.
Originally the the site was determined to be within the central area, but that was sort of almost revised to reflect a sort of density zone in an urban area to reflect the sensitivities of the site. What's the effect of the recent work to uplift the density? Is that bring it back into the sort of central area density?
It doesn't increase it to the 450 dwellings per hectare, which would be the kind of the sort of maximum threshold, but it does push it up to 400 dwellings per hectare. I think it's fair to say that that is, you know, a very dense scheme for the edge of town centre site that we believe it is, and particularly given um, the existing and emerging character and context surrounding the site.
And what effect does increasing the residential units on site have in terms of the retail dash town centre uses in terms of floor space?
Yeah, what we've done is we've just reflected the increase in the residential element and kept the non-residential the same.
And do you consider that's realistic in terms of the approach?
In terms of retaining the non-residential development as it is, I think that probably is realistic. And then increasing the number of units by, say, 46 units seems to be an appropriate balance.
And in terms of town centre uses, what would the net change be in terms of the retail element from existing to proposed?
So in terms of the calculation that we've made, albeit, I think this is a kind of high level basis, and I'm sure Austere Living will have more granular detail in terms of usable kind of floor space, but we've got a net increase of town centre uses of 3,000 square metres. That includes employment as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware that there were representations originally that the proposed capacities did not sort of optimize the site. Obviously, I am aware of the revised capacities and proposed modifications. Do you consider that those are appropriate? Do they address your original representations? It'd be useful to hear.
Yes, we are aware, and no, they don't. They are still unjustified restrictions to what we say should be a greater density. And of course, the relationship between density and height is also relevant. In terms of the relationship and restriction on height, which we parked at the last hearing, you'll remember, I'll ask Dr. Miele to say something as to whether those restrictions are justified on what is seen, I think, by common accord to be one of the most sustainable locations in the entire borough. And then I'll ask Mr. Leggett to deal with the issue of density and whether it's design-led, etc. Are you content with that, ma'am?
Yeah, I'm just council probably need to help me out on this one. I thought that these modifications arose at least in part from statements of common ground that have been prepared. Is that right? I just want to just to clarify whether those modifications are agreed, because it doesn't sound as though that's the case.
No, they're not agreed. I don't think there's anything in the statement of common ground that would have suggested otherwise.
Yes, I think there's still a disagreement in terms of the building heights and the indicative capacities.
That's
for the
my
site.
understanding.
I think we're, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're both saying that this is a developable site and it is deliverable. It's just a question of, a disagreement in terms of the building heights that we've set out within the policy and also the indicative capacity.
I was invited to correct you if you misstated. Our case is that the constrained capacity and heights are not justified on this supremely sustainable site. Our second key limb that we introduced through all our documents and referred to at the last hearing is that if it's restrained or constrained at that capacity and at those heights, it's not deliverable. It's neither viable nor deliverable and therefore not effective in terms of the tests as set out by the inspectors in the guidance note. And our third point is that there is an alternative, evidence-based, design-based position, which is set out in Dr. Mele's evidence, upon which the council has been completely silent just so far. So, ma'am, in a nutshell, those are our 3 points. Constrained capacity, not justified. If it's left where it is, it simply won't happen. Third, there is an alternative, which Dr. Mele will speak to.
You just have to bear with me. I'm trying to get to the statement of common ground. In terms of capacities, does the statement of common ground set out the capacity of living's preferred densities? Wait to it.
I think it's page 5. And it's in blue in my version. Tesco stores are Nasdaq living state. The site allocation background paper does not provide a true reflection of the site's character. It is instead considered that the site presents itself as an urban central location and should therefore be capable of facilitating a density of 450 dwellings per hectare. Tesco requires its replacement store to have a minimum net sales area, which is to be provided at podium level. Tesco have made it clear that this quantum is necessary to support the operation and viability of the store, and the site allocation should reflect this.
What's the floor space of the existing store?
Mr. Land.
5663 square meters, ma'am.
Five. Did you say 566?
Sorry, 5,663 square meters.
So the suggested you're seeking minimum net sales area of 2,325 square meters.
Yes.
So that would be a significant reduction on the current store.
It will be a reduction. I'm not sure it would be significant, and we'd need to have a look at the difference between net and gross. But I don't know if you've been able to visit the store, and I don't anticipate that you should have, but you will see that it's a very profitable store, but it's not a very efficient store. It's a first generation 70s, 80s Tesco. We'll come back to you on the actual net to gross figure shortly.
Yeah, I mean, it seems on face value that would be a significant reduction, but as you say, depending on net gross densities,
Yes.
etc., it may not actually be. But from what you're saying, there would be a minimum floor space that would be required to make the store viable.
Correct. Correct. Indeed, as we'll go on to see, and as Mr. Van der Laan says, that because the existing store has a very significant existing use value, and because the development brings great risks, for example, the store would need to be closed, there'd need to be a temporary store, there'd need to be a decant, all of which are very commercially risky propositions, then the Tesco as a landowner and a freeholder would only be incentivized to release the land for much needed housing in the event that they could at least meet and beat their existing use value, which is accepted by the council to be an appropriate benchmark land value issue. The real difficulty that the council have got is that they have very clearly and mistakenly misvalued the EUV, both by reference to
Yeah,
the adjacent.
I'm going to stop you
Yes, sorry.
because we will be coming on to viability
Yes, we will.
later on. I just want to get to the bottom of the floor space. You'll have to excuse me if I'm will sound a bit abrupt in today's session, but we do have quite an agenda to go.
No, it was a proper interruption. I got carried away and I'll shut up.
I do apologise in advance.
No,
for
no,
that.
no.
Just in terms of the floor space issue, just turning to the council, and I do appreciate this figure's gross. There's a figure of main town centre floor space of 7,604. Now that's gross as opposed to net, and I was just wondering how that fits in with Tesco's aspirations for their minimum floor space.
I'd have to go away and double check that. Again, I don't want to stray into kind of pre-application kind of discussions, but I didn't think there was a particular concern from Astaire when we were looking at the re-provision of the Tesco's floor space, which is in terms of the building footprint is pretty much as it is at the moment in terms of the actual physical footprint. Again, I'd have to come back to you on the net versus gross and forgive me, you know, obviously we're not supermarket experts, so that gross to net ratio and net sellable kind of floor spaces, it might be beyond offices here. But in terms of the building footprints that we were looking at, you know, if we can put one to one side, the conversation about how, just for the moment, we didn't have a particular issue with what was being proposed in terms of the floor space and the building footprints that were being proposed through the pre-application process. And again, I don't want to talk out of turn, but I don't think Astaire had any particular concerns at that stage either, given the kind of non-residential floor space.
We would agree with that entirely. The ambition is to
I just
produce.
wanted you to talk through.
Oh, I'm sorry,
through
ma'am.
us.
I'm sorry. I didn't even do this. Okay. But the ambition is to produce, as the council have just said, something that is broadly like for like in terms of its impact on vitality and viability and usability. The store is more efficient, but otherwise it serves the same town centre function as the existing store, but better.
It seems to me that there's not too much disagreement in many ways between the parties, and in terms of, you know, the bringing the site forward in principle. I hear what you're saying about the density issue, particularly in terms of residential. The obviously the net residential number of units has come up, potentially not to the extent that you would prefer, but it has come up. And what number of residential units were Astaire Living seeking?
Thank you, ma'am. Following the design-led approach that we've taken, we've demonstrated that a capacity of up to 814 C3 units or equivalent of other uses could be provided as uplift. That's on the basis of the 30-storey reference scheme that we've put forward, and Dr. Millie can speak to later.
It's quite a significant uplift, isn't it? I just, want to get the council's view. Obviously, the council's viewpoint is that there are constraints in terms of the site. Obviously, in relation to heritage assets, and another constraints, the character of the surrounding area. What view does the council have in terms of the suggested residential density?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, deliverability is a factor that we have to consider. And again, I think, we've made the point that we're not shirking away from our responsibility of delivering high density, tall development within the town centre. But we do have to, I strongly believe that we have to respond to the existing and emerging character. So, I mean, just to go through some of the site characteristics, and they may be disputed by us there, but these are factual positions. It is an edge of town centre site. It's physically separated from the core town centre by a railway line and then the River Ravensbourne. The site's approximately 1.5 hectares, so it's by no means a large site. It has a locally listed building on the site of 2 stories, Eagle House. It's immediately adjacent to the site on the southeast is an area of special local character, which is predominantly 2 to 3 stories. And again, within the adopted Lewisham Town Centre local plan, this area is highlighted as contributing positively to the existing townscape character. Immediately northeast of the site is an established residential housing area of predominantly 2 to 4 stories. Immediately northwest of the site is an emerging mid-rise character of Silk Mill Path and the nearly completed Conington Road blocks of 6 to 7 stories, with one 15-storey tall building to the north of the river. And then immediately south of the site is Conington Tower, which is the 34-storey block, which is on what we call the island site, and that marks the northern entrance of the Lewisham station. So it's quite a significant and prominent site, essentially. So, the predominant existing and emerging character of the surrounding area is one of low to mid-rise. And with the exception of Conington Tower, which again sits in the northern entrance of the station, we strongly feel that this has to be a transitional site. It has to mediate and it has to respond positively to the existing character of the surrounding area. And that's acknowledged within the tall buildings work that we've done. And what we've said within the policy, and we've made it clear that it is suitable for tall buildings. So again, we're not saying it's not a suitable site for tall buildings, given its accessibility, given that it is edge of town centre. But we do feel that building height should not normally be more than 16 stories. And 16 stories is still a tall building. So again, I don't want to go into too much detail and stuff, but I do think we have to reflect the aspirations from the NPPF, the National Design Guide, and also from our existing adopted policies, where we have to respond to existing character. And I think if we don't respond to existing and emerging character, and we let delivery lead densities, then I do think we're going to lose the general public and members. So we have to respond positively to the policy that we've got in place.
And from the council's point of view, what impact would a sort of significantly higher density scheme have on the character of the surrounding area?
Well, obviously, again, I don't want to go into too much detail in terms of pre-application process, but the options that we've seen at that scale, 30 stories and a significant number of tall buildings between 20 and 30 would have a significant detrimental impact on the existing character. And there is no evidence that we've seen thus far to suggest that there is an appropriate scheme that can be delivered at that scale and density.
Would Tesco's Astia Living like to come back on that?
Can I ask first, Dr. Mealy, to deal with the townscape point, please?
Thank you, Madam. I think we accept that the site is a transitional one and that has to mediate between the 35-story Conington Tower and lower areas of residential land that range between 2 and about 6 floors to the north. So that is agreed between us. Where we disagree is on two respects. The first is the sensitivity of the land to the north. The council have drawn attention to an area of special local character, which you may have seen on your site visit, and they've drawn attention to a former brewery building, which is a non-designated heritage asset that is located to the east of the site. However, when the council came to analyzing the sensitivity of the site in its tall building review in January 2023, and Mr. Syme very helpfully introduced this suite of documents to you at the last session that we attended. It explained that the land to the north had a, quote, mixed urban grain, and that's on page 10 of the document. And there's no reference to those heritage sensitivities that have just been identified. We acknowledge they're there. What is important to note is that the council do not say, and we agree, that no designated heritage assets would be adversely affected by the proposals. So that's, I think, common between us. The second, in relation to character inspectors, I'd point out that whilst there is a height range to the north of the site of between about 2 and 4 or 5 floors, that this residential accommodation doesn't orient or face directly towards the site. That accommodation is either inward looking in the form of the 70s housing estate, north of Conington Road. The flats that go with it face south. You will have seen that the land that rises up along Lewisham Road is much greater height than the site, and you will also have seen that at the junction of Lewisham Road and Conington Road, there is a rather large area of open space, green space, which is associated with the 1960s development, all of which to us suggests the potential to develop some scale in that location. There is also the obvious point of reference to the south of us, which is the Conington Tower, which I worked on, part of the consents process. And that scheme included a 14-story tower. So the Tesco site effectively lies between those 2 points of reference. And it is a complex site to deal with. Very briefly then, I think the second point I draw to your attention, which is a source of disagreement between us, are, I should say, the characteristics of the actual site. So it's a regularly shaped, it's a nice rectangular site. It's got a good orientation that allow blocks to be set north-south, so you can get good light penetration. But it's also a relatively deep site. And the reference scheme that has been submitted to you, Madam, which is in the appendix to the Boyer submission, and for your reference, it's page 16 in our appendix 1, actually shows how you can develop the site so that it affects a transition within itself. And if you're looking for that, Madam, it's figure 5.3, which is a massing model, on page 16 of appendix 1 to the Boyer submission. And I will just simply tell you, Madam, along Conington, Madam Inspectors, along Conington Road to the north of the site, which is that, we agree, more sensitive edge, the height shown in that scheme, and it's not a fully developed scheme, but it's a work-through scheme, range from 6 to 10 to 10. This is moving west to east, I should say, 6 to 10 to 10, 10, and then 5 stepping down to 3 in the immediate setting of the retained non-designated heritage asset. Bear in mind that for the purposes of the tall buildings review, a building in Lewisham is only tall when it's above 10 floors. So along the north edge of the site, we don't even rely on tall buildings. The site is deep enough so that the blocks can then step back and have a height, and it's the characterization with respect to the number of towers and heights was inaccurate. The reference scheme shows a height from west to east of the taller buildings as 12. That's under the 16 floor limit. 20, 30, and 19. So only 3 of those blocks go above the 16 floor limit. And inspectors, that tallest building, 30, is lower than the Connington Road building. And this scheme has been tested in different views, and it affects a transition down from what is the tallest building, I think, at the moment in the town center, which is the Connington Tower. So we think, and recognizing the objectives of the policy, that the site should be transitional, that we can achieve what the council wants in townscape terms, but that the height limits need to be more flexible to enable a design-led optimization process. And so, in fact, there isn't really very much between us. It's just that figure of 16 floors, which we believe, on the basis of this scheme, not a final scheme, but a pretty well worked up scheme, is too restrictive, and it would hamper the design process. That's all, Madam. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to sort of ask the council for a point of view on what's been said there, and in particular with reference to figures 5.2, 5.3 of the statement that was referred to there, just showing the sort of transitional area. It's in the appendix to Tesco and Astia Living statement.
I mean, again, and at the risk of having a kind of pre-application discussion through the examination, we have seen these schemes before, and we have reviewed those townscape analysis and the views that have shown, and we are still of the opinion that that does not provide an appropriate transition to the existing and emerging character of the site. And you know, again, go back to the MPPF paragraph 130 that states planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments are sympathetic to local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape settings, while not discouraging appropriate innovation or change, such as increased densities. And we believe that, you know, 16 stories, we are saying that this is an appropriate site for tall buildings. But what we're not saying is that this is not the same as the core town centre, which has very little existing and established character. If we were to accept this scheme, then, you know, this type of density, it would be equivalent to some of the schemes such as Lewisham Gateway, which again is entirely within the core town centre, has very little sensitivities surrounding it, and can accommodate that kind of level of change. The council maintains its position that it hasn't seen any evidence that a scheme of 800 units can be appropriately accommodated on the site.
Okay, thank you. I am aware not to stray into pre-app discussions. I think it's more about establishing whether the parameters in the plan and the requirements are sort of justified. Did Astia Living wish to
Yeah, Matt,
respond.
sorry, man.
Sorry.
Conversation has strayed onto a few matters which I think are very important, but I'm going to just come back to the question that I think was initially asked around the methodology by which the
Is your
capacity.
microphone actually on there? I'm not
Oh,
sure it is.
I need to be closer, sorry. Oh, goodness, it's quite uncomfortable, but I'll do my best. The question was around the methodology by which the capacity has been reached. We kind of, conversation moved on to other things and we were never given a chance to provide any of our views on that. And if I may do that now.
Yeah, I think you're going to need to lean into the mic a little
Even
bit
further,
more.
okay, all
We
right.
slow down a little bit.
I shall, forgive me. Mr. Syme has explained again today, excuse me, I mean, this is a matter of common ground, and Mr. Syme has explained it again today, that the site allocations background paper uses density-based assumptions from the 2017 London SHLA to inform the density or the capacity of the site as a starting point. As I'm sure you know, ma'am, a density-based approach is no longer supported by the London Plan. The London Plan 2021 EIP report at page 280 states that density should be an output of a design-led process, not an input. So the approach that the borough has taken is out of date and fundamentally flawed. Mr. Syme has said that the approach is robust. He said this today because it's been used under the London Plan. That was under the former London Plan. The current London Plan, again, clearly adopts the design-led approach, and that's what policies H1 and D3 advocate, and that's the approach we've taken in reaching our reference scheme. Also, the National Planning Policy Framework does not advocate the use of a density-based approach in reaching capacity figures. The framework only suggests that density should be relied on to inform minimum capacities. The framework thereby also endorses a design-led approach. So therefore, the approach that the borough's taken to reaching that capacity is fundamentally flawed because it's based on a density-led approach. In any event, if you are to accept that a density-based approach is appropriate, the council has mischaracterised the site as being urban rather than central. And I'll remind you of what the evidence base in relation to policy QD4 says. And we were here for that session, ma'am. It's a few days ago now, but Mr. Syme spoke at some length about there being two tall building studies done by Allies and Morrison. The first of those concludes that the site that we're here to speak about is in the most sustainable location in the borough, and also that it's the least sensitive location in the borough. The second of those documents reached the conclusion that on page 35, this is document EB02, and this is the name of that document is the Tall Buildings Addendum 2022. Again, it concluded that it's the most sustainable location in the borough and that building heights up to 35 stories were appropriate. So if I may come back to the council taking the wrong, they've mischaracterised the site by not accepting their own evidence base that talks about the site's sustainability and suitability for tall buildings. We have done a design-led capacity analysis, which takes us to the 814 homes that we consider as capable of being delivered on the site. There is an example that we refer to in our written evidence, ma'am. I don't plan to speak on this too long, but it's the example of the Carpet-Wright site. This site, the way that this site has been managed underlines the importance of taking a design-led approach rather than a density-based approach. The council granted planning permission for 758 student beds and 67 C3 homes on this site, which is a total equivalent of 370 homes. If you apply the urban or central density assumptions to that site, the resultant capacities are 92 homes or 117 homes. Now, there's quite a long distance between 117 homes and 370 homes, and therein lies the peril of applying a density-based approach. That site was able to triple its capacity, triple its capacity over what the density-led approach would have yielded. So taking all of that together, the approach that the borough has taken to reaching its capacity is fundamentally flawed. It fails to comply with policy H1 and D3 of the London Plan, nor does it comply with the framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Can the council respond to that, please? I think in particular to the reference to EBO2, I believe it was page 34. The point about being the most sustainable location in the borough. Is that the correct reference? Is that the correct reference? EBO2, page 34.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't think we're disputing that it is an accessible location. It's PTEL 6. It's the most accessible measure that you can get. So there's no dispute there. Just in terms of the methodology being fundamentally flawed, I think I'd ask the question where we don't have a design-led approach for site allocations. I'm just not quite sure what the approach would be. Is the participant suggesting that the council and indeed all local authorities have to master plan every site allocation to comply with the design-led approach? I mean, the methodology that we've used is a fairly standard methodology in terms of the density assumptions across London. Now, where we have the design-led approach, whether that's an endorsed master plan, whether that's an advanced pre-app, we have used that. But, obviously there's a disagreement about the level or scale of development that can go on the site, and therefore we have to effectively fall back on the density calculations and the methodology that we've used, albeit, and again, I'd reiterate that these are indicative capacities, and we make it very clear within the plan that these are indicative capacities, and the true capacities will be developed through the development management process, the design-led approach. And once again, I'd like to point out that we are not saying that this site is not a suitable location for tall buildings. The debate that we're having is about what that scale of development is. The council maintains that this is an edge of town centre site and it needs to respond appropriately to the existing character and the emerging character. And we do not believe, fundamentally do not believe, that the proposals that are being shown at the examination do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure we can take the discussion much further in terms of.
I'll do my most rapid possible, if I may, ma'am. One of the questions Mr. Syme asked was whether we expect local authorities to carry out a design-led approach on every site they allocate. Well, I direct you to paragraph 3.3.4 of the London Plan. I shall read it for you as quickly and clearly as I can.
There's no need to read it out, thank you.
It more or less says that yes, councils should take a design-led approach when allocating sites.
Okay, I think clearly the parties don't agree. I've seen the site. I'm aware of representations on both sides. So we shall take a view on that. I don't think we can really take the discussion in terms of densities much further. What I would like to discuss, though, in terms of deliverability is the constraints of the site. Are there any particular constraints to be aware of which may either preclude development, slow development down, or add additional costs?
I mean, once again, it's a complex town centre, edge of town centre site, which has an existing use on that site. So we definitely agree that there will be, phasing requirements to have a temporary store for continuity of business, etc. So that could impact on the cost. We've looked at the flood risk and done the exceptions test, which has been provided to the examination. There isn't anything particular on the site that would prevent the delivery or the ability of the site per se.
You touched on there in terms of the existing store and the continuation of trading. How is it foreseen that that would be able to happen? Because there isn't as much car parking on site as some of the other sites potentially that we will be coming on to look at. So how does the council envisage that would occur?
Again, I'm sure Astaire can provide a better answer than I can, but through some of the discussions that we've had, there would be effectively a temporary store on the car parking that's provided at the moment, I believe, and Astaire can correct me if I'm wrong. That will be a reduction in the floor space, I'm assuming, for a temporary period whilst the construction of the re-provided store comes on board. It's not an unusual situation, and I'm sure Tesco's and etc. can provide further detail on that.
Would you like to help us out with that one?
Yeah, sure. I've done work with Tesco before, and they're very accustomed to getting planning permission for and building temporary stores on their sites while they do these kinds of redevelopment. So that's something we're very content we can tackle through the development management process.
That leads us on to the deliverability and viability of the site. The whole plan viability assessment did conclude that the site would be viable depending on sales values and the level of affordable housing. Is that right?
Yes, it looked at a range of options, and clearly, I think we acknowledge that these, again, these town centre sites, particularly with high value retail, are difficult and challenging in terms of viability, albeit with the high level assumptions that that we were making through the viability assessment. There are viable options depending on the percentage of affordable housing that's provided on that site.
I am conscious that you disagree with that.
Sure.
Are you attending the viability
Yes.
session?
Yes.
You are.
No, we've provided specific written representations in relation to viability generally. And as per your note and guidance at the last hearing, we've provided specific, site-specific evidence on viability for this hearing. And I can sum up, before I pass on to Mr. Deland, sum up what the main issue is. Everything that has just flown from the council depends upon the mistaken assumption that the site has a benchmark land value of 5.6 million. And the only way that you get to those deliverable conclusions at various levels of affordable housing is if you've got that benchmark of 5.6 million. We pointed out on many occasions that that's in error. And for example, if you look at the Bell Green Sainsbury's, which is also a trading store, slightly larger, but just to give you a feel, that has been given a benchmark value of in excess of 63 million. So it's a huge difference. And it's important because everybody recognizes that to incentivize Tesco to do this risky thing, they're going to have to end up with something that's more valuable than they started with and which compensates them for the risk. So if you start with a benchmark land value of 5.6 when it's much, much higher, then your entire analysis is flawed. And what Mr. Van der Land has done is to see what happens when you impose a proper EUV on the site. And when you impose a proper EUV on the site at 16 stories, it simply doesn't stack up, and I'll ask him to explain why. So it goes to deliverability, viability, and then effectiveness, which is one of the tests of soundness.
The low BLV, which at the moment is 6.8 million, is just over 10% of the Belgreen equivalent floor space. But it is a site, the existing Tesco is 45% the size of the Belgreen store. So it is significantly out of kilter. It doesn't follow the calculation of that BLV for the Tesco site. It does not follow the proposed methodologies set out in the evidence base itself at paragraph 4.42, which proposes using the rateable value rent, applying a yield multiplier to it to determine a benchmark land value or an existing use value to which a 20% premium has been added to create the benchmark land value. So I believe it's an error in the evidence base. The only connectivity in numerical terms between the Belgreen site and the Tesco site is if you use a hectarage based average value per square meter or per hectare to apply between the two, and that is a fundamentally wrong way of measuring value for this type of site with an existing trading store on it. The value is in the trading unit, not in the area. The effect of having a very reduced BLV demonstrates underassumes the amount of or the quantum of development that is required to enable it to become viable, and overassumes the amount of affordable and other planning obligations that site is capable of carrying. And I've agglomerated the various outputs from the EB17 documents to demonstrate that only in 3 instances does the site not support a theoretical 50% affordable housing contribution. And that is just incorrect, but it is a product of having an artificially low BLV. And the second issue relates to, and as a consequence, may I say that it disincentivizes a landowner bringing forward the site for development when such an adversely low BLV is put on it, as it implies that the site will be capable of sustaining more planning obligations than it can. I reference in my statement a number of other points in relation to the viability assessment, which I think are at odds with the evidence that I've seen, and I've couched all of this in 2022 numbers rather than applying today's numbers or changes to since 2022. And my analysis of these numbers is that the 16-story scheme stroke 407 unit scheme does not throw off, so to speak, enough of a residual value to enable it to cover a reasonable level of benchmark land value. In other words, it ceases to be deliverable. And in order to generate an appropriate residual value from the site, you have to have an increased quantum of development on it. And we've tested that at 814 units, which by implication is up to a 30-story scheme.
Can I just ask the council? I'm struggling a bit with these tables at the size that they're at. Looking at the viability tables, I've just taken 6.12.1 as a starter. Just picking up the point about the benchmark land value. So the land at Conington Road and Lewisham Road has a benchmark land value of 6,817.28. Oh, it's 6 million, sorry. Yeah. And just picking up the point about the difference with the Sainsbury's Belgreen and Belgreen Retail Park, they are significantly higher in terms of benchmark land value. Can the council comment on why that is?
We don't have our expert who prepared the viability with us today, so we'll have to come back to that. Again, we can certainly come back to that in terms of the viability session later on. I don't have the answer to that question.
Are the viability consultants coming along to that session?
They are, yes, yes.
I think, I mean, I'm conscious that Astia living on at that session. So, but obviously it would be interesting to see where the benchmark land value has been derived from, because it seems quite pivotal in the assessment of viability for this site.
Well, I'm not sure that is a solution that is fair or equitable. We've been making this point consistently and pointing out that it's an error, including at the last hearing. And we were told and directed to do it in the site specific. This is a site specific benchmark land value issue upon which we've constantly opined that it is mistaken. The council could have taken advice in the meantime. Dr. Lee could have been here. If he's now going to present evidence, it will by definition be new evidence, which isn't contained in the statements, which you've already said you don't accept, and we won't be here to respond. Clearly, it's a matter for you, but we are fundamentally clear that it is in error. I leave it in your hands.
Would the council like to come back on that?
Yes, I mean, what I would say is that the viability evidence is to test the viability of the plan in its entirety, and I think we can have a debate about what level of detail that we need to get on in terms of site by site. It is a viability of the local plan in its entirety. And just to kind of lift this from the, the viability kind of argument is, I'm not quite clear whether the participants are saying that this is a design-led approach or a viability-led approach. They seem to be suggesting that they have a design-led approach, and yet what's driving the numbers is not a positive response to the context and a positive response to the existing character, but essentially a number that has to be hit. What the council would say is that, in accordance with the NPPF, the design-led approach should be responding positively to the existing character and the emerging character.
Well, sorry. We agree with that approach, and that's exactly what we have done. What the council have got is an allocation. It's wrong to say that as a matter of law, it's wrong to say that you test the plan as a whole for justification and delivery. As you've rightly pointed out at every stage of today, each allocation falls to be justified, and each allocation must be sound in the way that allows you to form a proper judgment as to deliverability. So my friend can't just escape that inevitable logic by saying it's the plan as a whole. Here is an instance where there is a clear mistake, a massive inconsistency with the way that other trading stores have been considered. And I would point out also that the car park for Conington Towers, which is the site upon which Conington Towers was built, was given a benchmark land value per square foot, which would dwarf that of Tesco's. And that went through an inquiry process. and was considered by a senior inspector and found to be appropriate. So that's another, if like, example of why it is that this benchmark land value, which you are right to say is pivotal, is inappropriate. Now, what we are able to say beyond that is that if you do a design-led approach, which Dr. Mealy has, then not only is it acceptable in broad terms, but it's also deliverable. And therefore, the question for the council should have been, what is it that delivers this most sustainable site in the borough? Allies and Morrison said the site was suitable for up to 35 stories, their own consultants. It's the later shift that we've just heard about, which is based on a capacity matrix which is out of date, which has led the figures to come down. And that and the combination of the absence of a reliable benchmark land value means that this allocation is unsound unless and until greater density is allowed. Otherwise, the site just simply won't come forward. One last thing, if one looks at GG2, which I know you'll have looked at, there are 7 areas in which decision makers are required to direct sustainable development. Every single one of those 7 bullet points is met by this site.
Ma'am, we don't wish to outstay our welcome, but I want to respond to a very important point that a question that Mr. Syme asked, if I may, please.
Yeah, could you just lean into the mic and maybe
Oh,
just take your hand away from
My
your face? Just
microphone
like-
is out to get me, forgive me. I want to assure Mr. Syme and this hearing that we absolutely did not reach the 30-storey scheme on the basis of relying on the viability first. We have been exploring and testing that scheme in urban design and townscape terms for a very long time. It's only since we've been pursuing the local plan through this process that we've begun to look in detail at the viability. To take a viability-led approach to the height of the building would be as wrong as taking a density-led approach, which we've not done. We've absolutely taken a design-led approach first, and we've tested that for viability in order to address the requirements of paragraph 35 of the framework in terms of whether the allocation is effective, i.e. deliverable, and it is. Thank you.
Have you finished your point there? Have you finished your point?
Yes, sorry, ma'am. Yes, thank you.
Would the council like to respond?
Just on the point of the evidence base in terms of the tall buildings, I think obviously we went through this at the tall building policy discussion. At each stage in the process, what we were essentially doing was taking a more localized, fine-grain approach to looking at appropriate maximum heights. And the council maintains that, again, you just need to walk the site to see that for tall buildings of the scale that is being proposed is not an appropriate solution. The council maintains that position.
I am conscious of time. I do take your point about the benchmark land value. It does seem to be out of kilter with some of the other benchmark land values. It would appear that the council are not in a position to respond to that. They would need to go back to their consultant. What I would say is I am aware of the issue, and I will be picking it up in the viability session. Hopefully the council will have the answer from the consultants. And if it is an error, then hopefully it can be revisited in terms of viability. I appreciate that's not ideal from your point of view, but I think that's where we've got to.
Sorry to cut across you, I'm really sorry. Might it be appropriate and fair in those circumstances if Mr. van der Land were to be here as well?
Well, certainly you've made duly made reps on the matter in terms of viability, so I don't see an objection. It would be a late participation request, but I think under the circumstances, I think that would be acceptable.
I'm very grateful.
And hopefully we can get to the bottom of that. And if I could ask the council to sound your consultant out in advance, I think it would be helpful so that he's aware of that issue. But certainly in terms of seeking changes, I'm clear on what your position is in terms of the parameters set out in the local plan. So I'm aware of that, and I have your evidence on that. So once we've heard the viability evidence, we can reach a view. We can reach a view on that. So I think that's really as far as we can go on that particular matter, if that's okay. Just checking my other questions for the site. Are there any unusual infrastructure requirements other than relocating the store? I think from what parties have said, just very briefly.
So, ma'am, there's policy requirements in relation to the river itself and creating a river walk and public realm related to that, opening up of the river, and there are physical works required on that river wall as part of the scheme.
And without this allocation, the Riverwalk isn't completed at this point because the Connington Tower only provided half. It's required.
I appreciate discussions on my next question are partly dependent on this issue of viability. So we'll have to cope with that in terms of the discussion. Subject to this issue of viability, and assuming it can be resolved, is the proposed development deliverable within the plan period in terms of timescales and the practicalities of providing a temporary store and sort of rebuilding on site? So in terms of the phasing, is the proposed trajectory is that deliverable? And again, I'm still going to start with the council because it's the council's plan.
Yes, thanks. So I think in our initial trajectory, we had this site within the 5-year land supply. We have provided two options to the inspectors, one which is the original assumptions and one is the sort of proposed slower delivery. Apologies, I'm forgetting the name of that. Slower delivery option, which looks at being more cautious in terms of the 5-year land supply, reflecting the conversations that we've previously had, if I may, Inspector. We have then moved the delivery of the sites beyond the 5-year period to years 6, 7 and 8, based on the uplifted 453 net residential units. I think given the disagreements in terms of the scale and the density, should we be in a position where the plan falls one way or the other, I think it's unlikely that this scheme is going to be delivered in the first 5 years of the plan. And then, of course, if for example, the site, according to Astaire, is not deliverable at the densities that the council has suggested, and depending on the inspector's decision, then it might not be developable in the 15-year period.
Just you're saying that the development's been pushed back. I may be looking at the wrong table. I have a number of tables. I'm looking at HT anticipated delivery. Land at Conington Road, 107 units, 26, 27.
Yep, so that's correct. So that's on page 1 of the document.
Would be within the.
So
5
that's
years.
the current estimate that we're suggesting. And then if you go to page 4, which is the actual housing trajectory on a slower delivery, you can see how it's moved back 3 years. So the 107 starts at year 6.
And just to be clear, which is the council's preferred trajectory? The anticipated delivery or the slower delivery, which is the council's position on that?
I think obviously, again, this is a kind of dynamic situation, and I think what we're trying to do helpfully, or it may not be helpful, but what we're trying to do helpfully is respond to some of the questions and queries you've had through the first 2 weeks of the examination, and look at a more cautious approach. I think it's fair to say that given the disagreements between the two parties, it's unlikely in this instance that that site will be delivered in the 5-year period, which is why we've pushed it back.
Okay, but moving forward through site allocation sessions, is the starting point the HT anticipated delivery? Just so we can be clear, otherwise it's going to be getting very confusing.
Yes, the starting point is the anticipated delivery. There is only a handful of sites where we've moved them back, and that is specified in the housing scenarios paper that we provided. So that gives an overview of where we've got this dual approach. But I guess what we're saying is the anticipated delivery is our starting point. The reason why we've re-looked at some of these sites, and in the we looked at the deliverability of sites in the Matter 12 statement, which has been revised, and within that we look at likelihood of deliverability, and it's those ones which have come up as being medium likelihood, so shown as orange, where we've considered that they might need to go further back in the supply.
So certainly in terms of this site, the HT slower delivery table is the council's position.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, and apologies. We've constructed these two trajectories to try to be helpful. So apologies if there's a level of confusion there.
That's fine. It's just understanding which one's the preferred one. So given the discussions we had in terms of providing the a sort of a temporary store, etc., it would seem to me that the second position in the HT slower delivery trajectory, which, if you don't have it before you, envisages, should I get this right, 107 units, 2930, 150 units, 3031, and 196 units, 3132, appreciating that's at a lower density than is your current position. But in terms of the starting point, in terms of output, is a 2930 start realistic from your point of view, or is it likely to be earlier?
Without putting too fine a point on it, if you issue modifications to the plan that agree that the 30-storey height cap should be introduced, we would move straight to a planning application, have that in within 6 months, allow for around 18 months for that to be determined, and that would put us in a position, recognising Tesco's insistence on a very tight period of delivery, that we would be delivering most, if not all, of the homes within the 5-year period.
So could you just link that back to financial years in terms of the starting point and the completion point?
I don't have that table before me, but let me think out loud if I may. Application submitted spring 25, determined by winter 26, delivery 29:30.
So that would tie in with the council's position in principle, 29:30, first sort of completions on the site. And what at your densities, what would the anticipated output per annum? When would it be completed?
Look quickly to my client while I'm answering this, but I would expect practical completion, delivery of all of the homes, 3031.
So quite a fast.
Once again, Astera are development partners for Tesco, and Tesco have extremely demanding requirements in terms of speed of delivery. That's one of the contractual arrangements they're under. So, and again, Tesco have done this before, and we've done it with them before. So we know it. Whilst there are complications around temporary stores and the river works, we think that's achievable.
I think the council's trajectory would have the final completions 31, 32. So again, we can take a view. We can take a view on that. That's probably more realistic in terms of the delivery timescale. Okay. Let's just check where we're at. Obviously, I'm aware of your position in terms of number of stories and the density issue. Are there any particular development requirements or guidelines which the council or Steer Living would like to draw to my attention?
Swap places with David in the hope that his microphone's better than mine. Thank goodness. Certainly by PC. Whilst I catch up, one of the development requirements in the policy is for a silk square, which is a public square, to be created as public realm. As we've set out through our pre-application discussions, delivery of a square is going to be extremely difficult given the operational requirements of Tesco, whose one of their absolute hard lines in allowing the site to be redeveloped is that they get the store that they need to function. We nonetheless are completely committed to delivering high quality public realm, including finishing off the river walk, but we would prefer that the requirement for a square, a public square on the river be, shall we say, downgraded to a guideline because it's going to be extremely hard to deliver.
The council's view on that?
I wonder if it's a case of the terminology here more than the development requirement, because clearly there is the opportunity to have a public space or some kind of public realm linked to the Silk Mills path. So I wonder whether it's actually just a terminology square that seems to invoke a civic kind of.
Yeah, if I may, ma'am, I think that's right. It's a matter of semantics. What is a square? What is public realm? And I think because it's semantics, it belongs better in guidelines anyway. If something's a requirement, it needs to be absolutely clear what it is. And that's open to judgment whether what you're developing is a square or just public realm. Hence, again, I think it should be a guideline, but I think we're not far apart on that, Mr. Syme.
I, given the time, leave that to the parties to sort out in terms of the wording.
Yep. Okay.
Can I ask the council to point me to any modifications, please?
Yes, if you indulge me one moment. My apologies, inspectors. If I could refer you to there are two modifications proposed. The first of which is contained originally in submitted document PD11 under modification reference MO243, which, as per today's addendum, has been amended. However, given the dynamic nature of this process, we would suggest a slight amendment to that, given the discussion that we've just had. The amendment that was placed before you today under MO243 refers to table on page 471. And it was proposed to align that with the HT anticipated delivery. As submitted, it deletes delivery during years 6 to 10 and transposes it to years 1 to 5. The council is, based on this afternoon's discussion, returning the yes to years 6 to 10. So it remains as it is. Moving on, the amendment, and the council stands by this amendment, the net number of residential units has increased from 407 to 453. The second proposed modification to LCA SA05 is also on the addendum submitted today, and that is reference MO280, and that's page 437, planning designations and site considerations, and it is adding reference to the New Cross, Lewisham and Catford opportunity area. Those are the amendments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes my questions in relation to the Connington Road site. If there aren't any other points, we shall move on. I just want to give a few moments in case you want to leave. If you have other commitments, you're more than welcome to stay. But if I'm happy to pause if you wish to escape while you can. Okay, thank you. Just conscious of time, so we'll keep moving. And move on now to site LCA 19, Lawrence House and Civic Centre. So in terms of the site capacity and assumptions, they have been derived from the Catford Town Centre framework, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And there's some quite detailed sort of designs and illustrations in there, aren't there, in terms of how the site could come forward?
Yes, so quite a comprehensive master planning process with several rounds of public consultation, and then in detailed, albeit indicative capacities derived from master plan layout and assumed building heights.
And how are the sort of range of uses, the mix of uses derived?
So the non-residential uses, again, have been drawn from the Catford framework, and in particular, a detailed study on the requirements, the future requirements of the council, and also the future requirements of creating a civic hub within the Catford Major Town Centre, and the retention of the Catford Broadway as well.
I'm conscious that this ties into the next site as well, in terms of the timing and delivery, the realignment of the South Circular. So maybe looking at both sites together just to save some time. So in terms of the timing and phasing of that, how does the council see the site coming forward?
So the rerouting of the South Circular, there is a planning application which has now been submitted to the council for the alignment of that South Circular. I believe in terms of the programme for delivery, the current update from TfL states 2028. In terms of the Lawrence House and Civic Centre, we've got a delivery programme which starts from 31, 32, and then moving forward to 32, 33, and 33, 34. So our anticipated kind of phasing for that for both of those sites is that we get the road in, and then we can move forward with the with that central piece.
So in terms of the trajectory, it's anticipated 29:30. Is that right? To start, and would that tie in with TfL's proposals for the South Circular?
Sorry, so it's Lawrence House and the Civic Centre, which has 87 units starting at year 8, which is 31, 32, moving forward to 32, 33, and then 34, 33, 34.
So I'm just going to turn to TfL now in terms of the timing of the realignment of the South Circular. What there's obviously a planning application. Has that actually been submitted, or is that due to be submitted?
It has been submitted.
So leading on from the planning application, when does the council expect that to be determined?
I'm not sure we've got a committee date yet, but we are in short order going to set that committee date. There are obviously funding deadlines associated with this scheme that we're also trying to hit, hence the update from TfL, which shows the scheme delivered by 2028.
And in terms of how that would coordinate with the development coming forward, it would seem to me that the redevelopment would fall, very quickly after that.
Yes, we would hope so. Once the road is put in place in 2028, clearly there will be work leading up to that, looking at pre-application process for a revised civic suite and redevelopment of that civic quarter prior or in parallel with that road being built out, so that we can either submit in advance of the 2028 or within within a year or so of that, and then be on site in year 31, 32, as we've predicted in the trajectory.
So we have the planning application for the realignment of the South Circular, but how is the actual redevelopment of the site going to take place? So, is there a planning application being prepared? Who's going to be leading on that? If you could just sort of talk me through that.
No decisions on that have been made yet from the council's point of view.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because if the development's going to follow the realignment of the South Circular, presumably there's arrangements need to be put in place to to be facilitating that. Again, it's quite a large scheme, so I just wondered how that's going to follow so quickly, if there isn't actually a planning application sort of being prepared, or the council aren't looking how to bring that site forward.
I mean, at the moment, where the council is looking at delivery options, but as I say, the council has not made a decision on how the scheme would be delivered. We have the Catford framework, which provides the parameters, but we will then have to enter into, or part of the council will have to enter into, a pre-application discussion with the planning authority and work that through.
So is the output of 170 units in 29-30 realistic on that basis?
We certainly think so. It's unless I'm mistaking, it's 8 years. 8 years away.
Okay, thank you. Straight into deliverability there. I'm conscious there's some other questions and matters that would be like to be raised by Culverley Residents Association.
Thank you, Madam. I just wanted to make a comment at this point on the planning application for the A205 realignment. The Residents Association has certainly made representations on that application, identifying a number of objections to matters of permeability and detail and impact, not the principle of it. We haven't heard back. We did request that the matter be discussed so that we could assist in the speed of determination, but that has not been offered by the council or TfL. But it could impact on the date of an application determination, since we're likely to want to try and pursue that particular matter. And in terms of delivery, as you can appreciate, we're only interested in the part of Site 19 that will be severed from the rest of it by the new aligned road. It's a small rectangle to the south of the proposed road. And our concern is that that site could then be brought forward early because it's unencumbered. It's just a council overflow car park for its staff at the moment. And therefore, this is why we're particularly concerned about the height issue affecting that particular parcel as well, because it could be taken as a green light for a 12-story building on that particular part sooner than on the rest of the site, since there's nothing else happening there.
Would you like to come back on that?
Yes, I think we broadly agree. The development requirement, part 1, states that the site must be delivered in accordance with the Catford Town Centre framework, which the particular site that the participant is referring to is identified as maximum of 6 stories. We certainly wouldn't accept on that triangular piece of land 12 stories as it butts onto the conservation area, as the participant points out, and responding to previous conversation about a design-led approach and responding to existing character, there would have to be a kind of appropriate transition. I think the participant makes we think the policy is clear in terms of our tall building policy, which says if a site is covered by an area suitable for tall buildings, it's not necessarily suitable for tall buildings of the scale of 12 stories. I think there's a question in my mind about this particular site and whether or not, again, I don't want to stray into too much about getting into more granular detail. It's, again, it's quite interesting that the residents associations want us to go into more and more granular detail, and the developers want us to be less detailed in our approach. But I think in this instance, I think there is justification for removing that small site from the suitability area based on the Catford Town Centre framework. It's not a suitable site for a tall building. It does have to provide the transition from the kind of 2-3 story conservation area. So, we've got it at sort of 6 stories in the Catford master plan, which seems like the kind of limit that would be at. So maybe if we can take that away as an action.
Yes, would that allay your concerns?
It certainly would. Perhaps I should just explain my cynicism, which is obviously different from developers wanting less granularity, is that I spent about 40 years working for developers. So I'm well aware of the approach that they take in town planning matters. It's just my concern is, for example, in the tall building review, the most recent one, the site, so if you were to look on, it doesn't really have a page number, but it's the Catford Emerging Character page. There's a plan, and unlike the other 3 sites in Catford Town Centre, which have stepped areas, this one is all, at the moment, it says 12 stories, but I would be very happy if the site were to be removed from the site. I mean, it would still effectively be a potential housing and mixed use site given its location. The capacity figure, the net 262 in the site 19 in the local plan, excludes the telephone exchange building, whereas actually in the tall building review, at that point, it was still included. So I'm not quite sure whether your capacity was adjusted when you excluded the telephone exchange building. But generally, I think we would be happy with what Mr. Syme is suggesting. I'm just too cynical to not have it clearly expressed clearly in the local plan, given what I know I would have to be arguing if I were acting for a developer.
Well, I think the council could look at the wording of that to make it clear.
Yes, and yeah, we can certainly review. I think it's figure 5.6 of the tall building policy, just to make it clear that we're not suggesting that that site that abuts onto the conservation area is a suitable location for 12-storey development.
And just bearing in mind that the potential amendment, would that affect the indicative development capacity?
No, because the development capacities are based on the Catford framework, which shows that as a potential 5/6-storey development on the corner there.
Just in relation to the phasing and timing of the site, obviously the buildings are in use presently by the council. What plans does the council have to, to relocate in in the interim period before the redevelopment of the site?
The council hasn't made a decision on the on how the staff would be relocated whilst any future redevelopment of the site takes place.
And is the site all council owned? The site 90?
Yes, the site is owned by effectively an at arm's length development operation or organisation which is associated with the council. Forgive me, I don't know the absolute details on that.
The council would have control.
The council would have control of the entire site, yes.
And other than the relocation of the South Circular and obviously the relocation of the council offices, are there any other significant constraints which could preclude or otherwise affect the deliverability of the site?
No. We've obviously submitted the flood risk sequential tests, but there's no physical site constraints other than obviously the two that you've mentioned there.
Thank you. Are there any other points on site 19? I'm going to be moving on to site 20 in the South Circular, which we've touched on as a very much interrelated. But just before we do move on, in terms of development requirements, I don't have any further questions. In relation to site 20, clearly the land is metropolitan open land, which is akin to greenbelt land. So firstly, I'd like to ask the council, bearing that in mind, what value does the site at present make to the metropolitan open land in question? What does the site contribute to the metropolitan open land designation?
The site itself for de-designation, I think we discussed this in the previous matter. What we have indicated in the site allocation is an indicative line which would be de-designated. This was prior to the final design detail submitted by TfL. And I think, again, I mentioned this previously in the green infrastructure matter, that we'd be seeking advice on if there's a potential way that we can effectively tighten that boundary now to respond to the detailed master plan and the proposal by TfL moving forward, which would significantly reduce the release of MOL in this instance. In terms of the quality, obviously this forms part of the St Dunstan's playing field. Primarily it is also the site entrance to the playing fields, which would have to be relocated, which is again part of the TfL planning application. In terms of its overall contribution, it contributes to the openness of the town centre. So as you are approaching the town centre from the stations, the playing fields has a kind of visual openness to it and creates quite a strong character in terms of Catford town centre, which is something that we would want to retain and will be retained if the rerouting of the South Circular is provided and approved. So in terms of the loss would be fairly minimal. It would essentially be losing the site access, which would be then re-provided, and a small proportion of the St Dunstan's playing fields, albeit it would not facilitate or necessitate the rearrangement of their existing playing pitches as the TfL application currently stands.
And what effect would the loss of that land have on the openness of the metropolitan open land designation?
I mean, again, if we do tighten up the boundary, minimal. You will still have that openness. You will still have that view. The existing arrangement, which is essentially a retaining structure, would essentially just move slightly further south and effectively realign the road. So the openness and the visual amenity that the St Dunstan's playing pitch or pitches affords at the moment wouldn't necessarily be changed.
Okay, and what are the exceptional circumstances to justify the loss of metropolitan open land?
So we provided the paper on the MOL exceptional circumstances. At a strategic level, again, I think we went through some of those points at the green infrastructure. The question about the realignment of the South Circular has been talked about for the last 40 or 50 years in Catford, and effectively has stalled the regeneration of Catford. The council had been progressing a town centre local plan, which was withdrawn because of this very issue. And effectively, the uncertainty has meant that investment within the town centre has essentially stalled. Whether it's the council or whether it is private landowners, they essentially want a resolution to this question. We've now got a position where the TfL, the council, the GLA, and dare I say, the principle is supported by resident associations and the public as well through the which it was demonstrated through the public consultation. There are certainly elements of the scheme that need to be ironed out from a council perspective and I dare say from a public perspective. But generally we're at a position now where we can move forward. There's been funding committed by the council. We have funding secured for this. And once we get it delivered, then we can move forward positively with the regeneration of Catford.
Thank you. And just in terms of the potential revised boundary, is that going to be proposed through the local plan process? Is that going to be a proposed modification?
If the inspectors think that would be appropriate, as I said, the boundary that's before you was prior to the submission and prior to the final TfL scheme, which again, as I said, covers a much larger and greater extent of MOL de-designation than is necessary, and the council would like to, through the examination process and through the main modifications, adjust that accordingly.
Just thinking about the implications of that, would that be an issue for TfL? Would it potentially prevent any realignment if the TfL need to consider a slightly revised scheme? Would it constrain the realignment in any way?
My understanding is that the boundary line would be quite suitable to be fixed at this point. It's not going to change definitely over the course of the application.
So if the local plan were to revise the boundary and result in less MOL land being lost, that wouldn't be an issue for TfL?
No, and we can supply a diagram that would show what would be a suitable boundary for that.
I think that might be useful actually to inform the examination. If I can leave that as an action point through the council. Would you like to make a point?
Yes, I'm not making a representation because we didn't, but as a factual point, the Residents Association did suggest in its comments on the application how mitigation of the loss of that strip of MOL could be best addressed to preserve the openness of it. So we think there's a way to do that with making sure the railings that are there at the moment are kept so that there's a view through. There used to be a solid fence, you couldn't see the open space, and also some additional tree planting to make up for the loss of the openness.
Okay, thank you. That sounds like a way forward in terms of the revised boundary then, that particular site. Any other points in relation to site 20 or 19? No? Just to check our participants, happy to carry on. We have LA22, the retail park, and Catford Island, and the bus station, which the participants are involved in. Are you happy to carry on? Do you want a comfort break? Shall we say to return at 4 o'clock? Yeah, thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Um, it is getting rather warm in here and quite humid, so if people do want to take the jackets off, do feel free. I don't want anyone passing out on us. So just moving on now to the Ravensbourne Retail Park. If the council could just start off by setting out how they've arrived at the density and the number of net residential units and the non-residential floor space figures, please.
Yes, so this is a site where we've had initial contact by the landowners and a few pre-application discussions, but not suitably advanced to adopt their capacities. Therefore, the density assumptions have been applied with the site's character as central PTAL 4, and that generated a density, according to the London SHLA, of 355 dwellings per hectare. We then considered the sensitivity of the site, particularly reflecting the surrounding character and the conservation area, and effectively reduced that from central down to urban, which then generated a density of 225 dwellings per hectare. We have looked at the non-residential floor space and looked at the existing non-residential floor space, but also reflected the fact that the site itself is quite well located within the strategic or next to the strategic industrial location. Actually decided that this could be quite a good location for employment uses or a proportion of employment uses on the site. Certainly, when we were engaging with the landowner, they were receptive to the idea of employment uses and looking at sort of part of the site for the employment uses. So we ended up with a land use mix of 70% residential, 20% employment, 5% town centre uses, and then 5% others, which then generated 367 net residential units. 7,750 employment floor space gross, and then just shy of 2,000 square meters of town centre floor space. We have explored the option of, particularly in terms of the 20% buffer. Again, we had this site anticipated some of its delivery within the first 5 years of the plan period. So we were looking at whether or not the site has the ability to be uplifted. So there is a suggestion that we could uplift that to 461 net residential units, which is explained within the residential density technical paper. That would uplift that to 300 dwellings per hectare. I think, again, in terms of the anticipated delivery, we have, and again, apologies for this, but we have provided a kind of slower delivery option as well, which essentially moves that out of the 5-year period and into years 8 and 9.
Sorry to interrupt, just before we get on to delivery though, we'll come back to that. The council's obviously looked at the potential to uplift the sort of number of houses on the site, but you have referred in your opening comments there to the conservation area. There's the Bellingham character area, for example. How would the increased density sit in terms of the surrounding character of the area?
I think that's a fair question and a fair challenge, and obviously going through these mathematical exercises, one needs to consider and reflect and maybe stick the head above the parapet and consider what the implications are, and certainly chatting to the participant from the Culvery Green Association, I recognise, and I think we recognise, that the site does have sensitivities. I wonder whether, if we could take another look at that and just see what the implications for that uplift would be. My hunch sitting here is that that might not be appropriate given the sensitivities that we've got in the surrounding context.
The surrounding area is sort of quite residential and suburban in many ways, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, obviously, we'll hear from the participant. We do think that this site is of a size, of a suitable scale to accommodate an uplift in density from the suburban kind of 2-3 story nature of the surrounding accommodation. And we did look at this through the A21 development framework and look at massing options, and particularly massing options that retained the open space, which is part of the Culvery Green conservation area, and then step up development from that so that any taller elements were in the centre of the site, away from those particular sensitivities. We think that's a suitable approach. It would then be an uplift in density, but I think that then can be mitigated in terms of the impact. I'm just a little bit nervous, and again, I'm talking out loud, but just in terms of the uplift that we've presented there, an additional 94 units, that might not be on top of the A21 development framework. That might not be appropriate.
I'd like to bring Culvery Green Residents Association in now, please.
Thank you, Madam. We are cognizant of the need for housing delivery, although actually it is, notwithstanding COVID, it's a surprisingly populated and used retail park, but I'll set that aside. The problem is that the height level has been gradually increasing. In the Tall Buildings Addendum study, page 46 puts this in Zone B, which identifies it for Bellingham area for 8 stories, but possibly rising more next to Bellingham Station. Well, the area next to Bellingham Station has now been excluded because it's staying as a strategic employment area. The A21 framework talked about 10 stories as a maximum on this site in the centre, away from the boundaries. And we now have a position in the emerging local plan of 12, which I have to say is quite clearly capacity driven because of the council's need to provide its housing buffer. And perhaps, ironically, is quite the opposite of the position that the council just took with the Conington Road site, where it was critical of capacity being used to justify the 30 stories rather than it being design-led capacity in order to make it viable. So I think we have spoken about the need for the frontage to the open space being no more than 6 stories, which is what appears in the A21 framework. There's a need to consider avoiding overshadowing it because it's to the buildings would be to the west of the open space. the open space runs north-south along Bromley Road. At the moment, it adjoins mostly just the car park for the retail park. Of course, this site was going to be larger. It was going to include the Selco, the storage warehouse and the Helford site, which was going to allow for a realignment with a park running down to the river. Even if there is now a riverside walk area, because those sites are being retained within the strategic employment, it's a smaller site, and that open space to Bromley Road is important. So we don't want it completely overshadowed with tall buildings. And there are views out of the streets in the conservation area into the site. So if you put a 12-story building in the middle, even if it is set back, you're going to see it from those roads. I would just very briefly point out that in the conservation area appraisal that the council produced, it really does talk about this, the special interests of the conservation area lying largely in the strong cohesive identity of Edwardian developments, low-rise villas, and therefore we just want to make sure that this does indeed complement as opposed to jar with it. So I think we have a problem with the justification for the further increase in height, and I'll just end by drawing to your attention in the tall buildings study addendum, pages 44 and 45 set out for the Catford area the results of the criteria for assessment, and this site is not identified, but when you look at the it's a series of maps, and when you look at them, the high PTEL does not apply. The 12-minute walk from an existing station or planned Bakerloo line station does not apply. The town centre designation does not apply. The opportunity area does not apply. The growth area does apply because it's on the A21 framework. The tall buildings clusters does not apply. The high cycling transport accessibility level, I can't quite understand whether it's the white or the green, but it is on a main road with a cycle route, so I would say yes. But overall, the combined suitability is, it's hard to tell because it's a heat map all in green, but it looks towards less than halfway through between less suitable and more suitable. So there are some justifications for it being a redevelopment site. Mixed use is a good idea here, but it doesn't strike me as being obviously the site for a 12-story building. So this morning I put that we didn't want to pursue removing heights completely from the sites as we had originally set out, and I moved on from that position, provided that we had some reasonable references in the actual allocations. And we're happy with site 19. For this one, I think what we want to see is that the frontage to Bromley Road has a height limit of 6. And ideally, we would like to see an overall height limit of 10. Of course, that doesn't preclude someone coming in with a superb scheme that rises over 10, and that can be considered by the council on its merits. But we think as a general guideline to the development industry, it should be 10. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What's the council's view on that? Bearing in mind the references there to the tall building study and the criteria in that study.
I mean, again, I think there's a lot of similarity in terms of what we're achieving and what the Residents Association wants. I think we acknowledged and we have some development guidelines within the site allocation, which says that tall buildings should be located in the central part of the site away from the A21. The A21 development framework looked at 5 to 6 stories along the A21, providing that kind of transition, particularly with the retained open space, which is in the conservation area, and then tested a couple of blocks at 10 stories essentially. So I don't think there's too much between us in terms of our approach and what the Culvery Green Residents Association are after. The tall building suggests a maximum story height of 10 to 12 stories at present. It is within walking distance of Catford Town Centre. It is PTAL 4. It is on the A21, which is an identified growth corridor. It is surrounded mainly by strategic industrial land, so the impact is of kind of taller, denser development is less than other schemes that we have that we've talked about. Albeit, you know, I recognise that on the northern side and the eastern side there is the conservation area.
The council's view in terms of the point made that there are there would be views through from the conservation area to the centre of the site with the tall story. What impact would that have on the conservation area?
I mean, I think I think I've said this before when we were discussing heights. That isn't an untypical scenario in London these days. Most conservation areas, if you go to them, will have views of significantly taller elements and dense development, which is, you know, all part of the step change that is being promoted through the London plan and the step change that is promoted in Lewisham through this plan and the previous plan.
So just in terms of moving forward, I think the council has agreed to look at the potential increased density on the site and as whether that's appropriate within the context of the surrounding area. So we have that as an action point. Are there any other potential adverse impacts or constraints which may hamper the site coming forward or affect viability?
No, obviously the site is adjacent to the River Ravensbourne. We've done the flood risk exception test. Obviously there'd been negotiations with EA, but there's no significant infrastructure requirements or physical constraints as we know of for the site.
Yes.
Thank you. I would like to say, in respect to the River Ravensbourne, we really would like to see a genuine opening of the river, not simply a footpath behind the existing concrete channel. Unfortunately, in the town centre, the Barrett site between the two stations was promised to be an improvement to the naturalisation of the river, and it didn't happen. There's still concrete walls. Barrett's put some wooden blocks on the river floor and poured some stones on them, which was to slow down the river. Well, they were predictably all washed away in high storm weather. So we really feel it needs to be a more genuine task of cutting back part of the river wall so that a lower level can be created for planting along the river.
And just picking up that point, is that addressed in terms of the development requirements or guide?
Yes, absolutely. So we share that ambition. So page 515, development requirement 4, which says development must be designed to improve the ecological quality, carbon storage, flood storage, and public amenity value of the River Ravensbourne, and seek to renaturalise the river where feasible, taking into account the River Corridor Improvement Plan (SPD).
Okay, thank you. In terms of viability, what does the viability study say about the site?
So in terms of the viability, again, the viability acknowledged the challenges, I think, of developing particularly these higher value retail parks. So it does essentially say that the site is going to be kind of challenging in terms of the viability, depending on the assumptions that we make on the sales value and the affordability. But there are options which looks at the a kind of increased sales value which are viable across the board, and then takes a look at a more cautious approach in terms of the sales value, which again may be difficult at those higher percentages of affordable housing requirements. So again, it will be, we have got developer interest in this. The landowner has approached the council, and through the development management process, we'll be looking at a more detailed viability approach through that DM process.
And is it a single landowner?
Yes.
You refer to pre-application discussions. Is there any indication when a planning application is going to be submitted?
No indication. I mean, again, obviously, it's a fairly dynamic situation. We did have quite strong engagement and a flurry of pre-application discussions, which have since gone a little bit cold, which is why I think in terms of the anticipated delivery, we had some element of delivery within the end of the 5-year period. I think it's more realistic to suggest that that will slip from the 5-year land supply. And in terms of the slower delivery trajectory, I think we've indicated year 7 and year 8 as more realistic.
Okay, so the council's position on this site would be the slower trajectory.
That's correct, yes.
In terms of pre-app discussions, is the developer going to be providing a master plan? Just aware of earlier discussions.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we will be requiring a master plan led approach for the site.
Are any modifications proposed to this site allocation?
Yes, Inspector Malloy, there is a modification proposed under submitted document PD 11, but subsequently modified by today's addendum, but the reference is the same. It is MO247, and it identifies the increased number of net units at 461. Obviously, in light of the action that the council has agreed to undertake, that figure may change again.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there were any other modifications that I'm aware of.
No further modifications that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Any other points in relation to this site as 22?
Thank you. Can I just have clarification that in looking at the capacity again, the council will take it on the basis of the frontage development being no more than 6 stories?
We will look at the developer guidelines, which I think clearly states it doesn't have a story height, but does state that the taller element should be located within the centre of the site, and there should be an appropriate transition. I'm not sure if that's, again, a question if that's clear enough. Just to add, you know, what we haven't done, generally speaking, within the site requirements and site guidelines is tie down particular story heights. You know, we've taken a kind of general approach to the scale and massing. So again, towards the A21, the development should step down to respond positively to the conservation area. Taller buildings should be located within the centre of the site. We feel that that's an appropriate level of detail and provides adequate steer to the development industry.
Thank you. Well, I'm only concerned because, for example, for the Catford Island site, tall buildings suitability zone for Catford proposed, which is chapter 14, tall building suitability zones in the local plan, page 91, shows maximum 20 for the centre and 6 for the, almost like a donut circle of it. Whereas the site 22 just says 10 to 12 stories all over it. So by not having the change to wording that we originally talked about, proposed for LCA4, instead, what we really want to see is that drawing in the local plan actually identifying that there is a strip to the Bromley Road frontage that is no more than 6 stories, and our view is 10 behind. The council might still have a different view, but rather than simply having one designation, because it has on a number of sites in Catford included 2 maxima according to whether it's peripheral or central.
And development requirement 3 does say positive frontages along Bromley Road and Aiken Road. What does the council mean by that precisely? Development requirement 3, positive frontages along Bromley and Aiken Road. Is that in terms of the sort of non-residential uses?
Yes, I think that is the case. You know, obviously there's a component of non-residential use that we're suggesting for the site. and we think that that would be appropriate on the A21 in terms of providing that positive frontage.
I mean, in terms of the points raised about the having a lower number of stories around the edge of the site, is that something the council agree with, or in terms of the transition to the sort of outer edge of the site? On the spot.
I think we can, yes. I think we can, particularly towards the A21 and towards the forgive me, the existing residential street to the north, because that is what we would be anticipating, and we would be very strongly advocating through the development management process. So I'm happy to make those changes.
Might be worth looking at a form of wording as well, which reflects that, if that's the council's sort of idea behind the how to deal with the sort of edge of the development. It may be worth just looking at how that could be phrased in one of the requirements potentially.
Yes, we will relook at development guideline point 5 and development guideline point 6, which I think goes some way to addressing that, but might need just a little bit of some tweaking to make that more apparent.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other points on site 22 before we move on? Would you, if you want to go, by all means. I think we'll just keep moving given the time, but by all means, sneak out if you so wish.
Thank you, I'm obliged.
Okay, just moving on now to LCA 18 and Catford Island, if everyone's happy to continue. Just it would be useful if the council could set out how it arrived at the site areas and capacity assumptions. And I think in my usual question about the any net gain or loss of employment or town centre floor space as part of that point.
Yeah, so the capacities within the local plan reflect the Catford Town Centre framework and the master planning work that's been done through that process and the public consultation that's been carried out, responding to the development heights that were indicatively shown within the Catford Town Centre framework, which indeed then relate to the tall building policies. This demonstrates a net residential target of 602 net units, gross employment floor space of just over 6,000 square metres, and gross town centre floor space of just over 6,000 square metres. I think the employment and the town centre floor space reflects its central position within Catford major town centre. It also reflects the potential need to re-provide at least one, if not two, of the larger footprint uses within the site. In terms of net net increase, in terms of the main town centre uses, there's a small net increase of approximately 800 square metres, but quite a significant increase in terms of employment floor space of just over 4,000 square metres. And again, this is reflective in the council's obviously trying to meet its and delivering against its targets overall for employment floor space, particularly the office increase that we have to provide, but also inherent demand that we see within Catford Town Centre, which is evident from a recent conversion of the building adjacent to us being let for office space, particularly for the Lewisham Hospital and other occupiers. So there's an inherent demand there for flexible office and employment floor space, which we're trying to meet as well.
It's been a long day. What about any adverse impacts in terms of developing the site?
None which would prohibit the development of the site. Again, we've done the flood risk sequential test. Other than the south circular realignment, which does impact on this site allocation, which has been factored into the Catford framework and also the development capacities. Other than that strategic infrastructure project, there is no other strategic infrastructure constraints.
And what's the time frame for the realignment of the A205? Is that the same as previously described?
Yes, I can answer that. So the planning application considers this as a continuation. So the site will be, the entire road scheme will be delivered by 2028.
So the planning application that we touched on earlier would be part of, it would include this aspect of it as well?
Indeed, yes.
Okay, thank you. And just generally in terms of the effect of the scheme on the highway network, are there any, other than the realignment of the A205, are there any other adverse impacts or traffic or transport improvements which are required?
The application effectively covers Sangley Road, Plassey Road, Bromhill Road and Rushy Green, so effectively covers all four roads which border the site allocation and suggests changes to that highway. So my understanding is that those, obviously that strategic infrastructure project is required, but nothing further after that. Clearly there'll be some localized issues relating to access, servicing, etc., which will be dealt with through the kind of development management process. But we have been pre-apping on this site, and the developer had been in contact with TfL and liaising with how to accommodate the changes to Sangley Road and Plassey Road on their site, and also accommodate access for servicing, etc., onto the land.
Certainly, looking at the town centre framework, the proposals would help to sort of consolidate the town centre and bring the site back into the town centre more, because it is very much an island, I think, at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. I mean, that is the key principle to certainly the kind of central access, which is through a kind of passageway at the moment, to make that a much stronger central access and create a sort of small local square within that central area, which the non-residential uses then focus around, and indeed, yeah. Pull that island site back into the town centre.
I think improve permeability through the site as well, and improve access back into the town centre. You touched on the landowner there. Is it a single landowner, or are there multiple landowners? What's the situation?
There are multiple landowners on the site, but the majority of the site is owned by the Church Commission, and so we have got a proportion of the site to the northwest, which is partly in council ownership, and then partly in third party, but the majority of the land to the east, to the south, and to the centre is owned by a single landowner, which is the Church Commission.
And you say that working towards a bringing forward a planning application?
Yes, we were, and unfortunately, through the statement of common ground, we've been made aware of some issues between the landowner and developer, Barrett, which we're trying to get to the bottom of. So we were at advanced pre-app stage. Generally, officers were supportive of the scheme. And the timeline was to submit a planning application at the end of last year, and unfortunately that has not come to fruition. As I said, the council is contacting both the Church Commissioner and Barrett's to understand what the delay is and where we stand in terms of the trajectory.
Okay, is this one of the sites that the council's looked at potential uplift on?
No, I don't think so, no. This is a site where we have we had within our 5-year, in fact, we had a small proportion within our 5-year land supply towards the end, on the basis that essentially we were due a planning application at the end of last year, but that obviously that position has changed. So we are suggesting within the slower delivery trajectory that moves back out with the 5-year land supply.
So the council's position is on the basis of this slower, the slower anticipated trajectory. Is that realistic given the uncertainty that's there at present?
I think we would concede that that may slip. We are trying to we're trying our best at the moment to get intelligence from both the church commissioners and Barrett's. Given that we had a scheme effectively worked through pre-application process, which officers were happy with, obviously the council needs to make a decision on that. But if their relationship could get back on track, or if there's an agreement to be struck there, then it may be very quick. I think at the moment we've put it into years 6 to year 9 in terms of the delivery of that site, given the kind of advanced pre-apps that we had.
I mean, is it something that could be pursued through the examination in terms of, you know, just asking the inspectors asking the question of when that site's going to come forward?
If I can speak candidly, and David can kick me under the table if I go beyond the mark, we have actively sought to contact the church commissioners, actually seeking to secure an SOCG with them. That has not been fruitful for whatever reasons unknown. But obviously the council is actively seeking to sort of secure the delivery of these sites. So obviously, whilst there was an immediate purpose to do that for the examination, that purpose doesn't go away when the examination finishes, and I think there's every reason for the council to try and pursue a relationship, whether it is with the nascent property developer or whether it's with the church commissioners directly.
I think, again, I don't want to stray into kind of sensitive information, etc. But I think the church commissioners, or certainly our understanding is that they are amenable to the site being a developable site, but they have certain thresholds, particularly around affordable housing, that are red lines for them, essentially. I'll leave it there.
Okay, well, I think if the council could keep trying to chase them, that would be helpful. You know, to get an answer on that. But I appreciate if they're not wanting to respond, there's not an awful lot you can do. But yeah, it would be helpful to keep persisting on that. See where we're at now. I think we've touched on most of the questions that I had. So we move on. Conscious TfL have sat there very patiently. Just if we move on now to Thurston Road Bus Station, just give me 5 minutes to get my things together on that one.